The wind sliced through the valley like a knife, dragging with it the bitter scent of winter and the sharp tang of decay. Beneath the bruised sky, a frail Mustang stood tied to a gnarled oak, its legs trembling, its coat once sleek and proud now hanging in patches of muddied gray. His breath, shallow and ragged, clouded the air around his nostrils in ghostly bursts. Every shift of his body made the frayed rope dig deeper into his flesh, staining the frost-laced bark a sorrowful shade of red. Somewhere in the distance, a lone wolf howled, its voice curling through the trees like a prophecy of death. Standing a few feet away, boots planted firmly in the crusted snow, was the farmer. His face, hardened by years of sun, wind, and 1,000 unspoken regrets, betrayed no hint of remorse. He watched the horse with the cold detachment of a man who had long ago traded empathy for survival. Silas McGraw had seen too much loss to carry tenderness anymore. The droughts had taken his crops, disease had taken his wife, and now, the lingering illness in this Mustang threatened to take his last shred of hope. He would not let it. In his mind, mercy had become weakness. There was no place for weakness on this land. The Mustang had been his last gamble. Caught in the high desert, its spirit unbroken, it had been a flash of wild magic Silas thought he could harness. Strong, fierce, beautiful, he had seen his salvation in its furious eyes. But the wild had not left the creature easily. Months of backbreaking work had yielded nothing but stubbornness and rage. When the fever came, reducing the Mustang to little more than skin and bone, Silas felt the crushing weight of betrayal settle in his chest. And so he made his decision. The wild had given him nothing, and he would give it nothing in return. He yanked the knot tighter, jerking the Mustang's head against the rough trunk. The animal staggered, a soft grunt escaping its chapped lips, but it no longer had the strength to fight. Silas turned without a word, boots crunching over ice and dead leaves, his broad shoulders disappearing into the mist. Behind him, the horse sagged against the tree, a creature too young to understand the sentence it had been given. As Silas trudged away, the sounds of the forest grew louder, the brittle snapping of branches under unseen paws, the whisper of wings overhead. The Mustang strained weakly against the rope, instinct screaming at him to run, to fight, to live. But every attempt ended with the searing pain of the rope slicing his raw skin. Blood trickled down his legs in thin rivulets, staining the snow at his hooves. His body betrayed him just as surely as Silas had. His ears twitched to catch the sounds beyond the darkness, the low, rumbling growls of predators drawn by the scent of blood. Above, clouds pressed low and heavy, casting the world in shades of iron and ash. Night would fall soon, and with it would come the cold, the hunger, and the teeth. The Mustang's sides heaved with the effort of simply breathing. Memories flickered at the edges of his fading consciousness. Open skies, the thunder of hooves, the warm nudge of a mother's muzzle urging him forward. He had once been a creature of endless movement, of boundless life. Now, he was a tethered ghost awaiting the inevitable. The forest grew darker by the second. The thin light leaking through the trees was swallowed by the encroaching night. Every noise became a threat, the snap of a twig, the soft patter of snow dislodged from an overhead branch. The Mustang flared his nostrils, catching the acrid scent of wolf on the wind. Panic fluttered in his chest like a trapped bird. He reared his head, trying to tear free, but the rope held fast. The bark scraped his neck, and the world spun dizzily before him. He stumbled, barely catching himself before crashing to the ground. Somewhere deep in the woods, a second wolf answered the first, their calls weaving a tapestry of menace. They were coming. The Mustang's muscles tensed, the primal fear of prey animals seizing control. He dug at the snow with his hooves, sending up sprays of white powder, but the effort only drained what little strength remained. His vision blurred, the outlines of the trees smearing into one another like melting ink. The wolves moved closer now, their shadows merging with the darkness, unseen but felt. The Mustang trembled, every fiber of his being screaming in silent terror. He tossed his head wildly, foam and blood flecking his mouth, his heart hammering against his ribs in frantic beat. Yet the rope remained unyielding, a cruel reminder of his helplessness. Time stretched into a cruel parody of itself. Every second felt like a lifetime, every gust of wind a whisper of doom. The Mustang's knees buckled, and he sagged lower against the tree. His breath rasped through clenched teeth. Somewhere beyond the forest, life continued without him. Rivers flowed, birds sang, herds ran wild and free under the stars. But here, beneath the gnarled oak, death tightened its noose with every passing heartbeat. And then, through the haze of pain and fear, he heard it, not the snarl of wolves or the crunch of approaching footsteps, but a sound low and resonant, like a drumbeat deep within the earth. Oh, heavy, deliberate, commanding. The Mustang flicked his ears toward the sound, struggling to lift his head. The wolves hesitated, their predatory rhythm disrupted by the alien presence. A deep, guttural snort echoed through the trees, full of warning and authority. The Mustang's bloodshot eyes caught a flicker of movement, a massive silhouette emerging from the mists, crowned with a mane like a black banner whipping in the wind. It was a stallion, ancient and scarred, muscles rippling beneath a pelt dark as midnight. His eyes burned with a fierce, almost otherworldly intelligence. He stood between the wolves and the dying Mustang, massive chest heaving with each breath. The wolves snarled and circled, sensing a new challenge, but they did not rush in. Something about this stallion gave even the desperate pause. The Mustang watched, paralyzed by awe and confusion. The stallion turned his head slightly, meeting the Mustang's gaze. For a heartbeat, the forest seemed to fall utterly silent. In that look, there was no pity, only recognition, a bond older than fear, forged in the crucible of survival. Wild called to wild. The stallion pawed the ground, his hoof splitting the frozen earth. His ears pinned back against his skull, and he released a roar that was part scream, part battle cry. The wolves, momentarily startled, pulled back, hackles raised. But they were hungry, and desperation made them bold. The Mustang's heart stuttered painfully in his chest. His legs twitched, his body yearning to move, to fight, to answer the call of the wild that had never truly left him. But the rope bit deeper, holding him captive while salvation stood agonizingly out of reach. The wolves began to circle again, low and menacing, their golden eyes reflecting what little light remained. The stallion turned slightly, positioning himself between the wolves and the Mustang once more, every muscle coiled in readiness. Night swallowed the last vestiges of day, and the first star blinked awake in the freezing sky. Somewhere deep in the bones of the earth, a choice was being made. The Mustang felt it. This night would either break him or remake him. A cold gust of wind swept through the clearing, lifting the stallion's mane in a wild halo around his head. The wolves snarled, muscles bunching. The wolf sprang through the air, its body a streak of snarling muscle and hunger. In a single, explosive movement, the black stallion met it mid-leap, his hooves slashing downward with brutal precision. Bone cracked on impact, and the wolf was hurled sideways, yelping as it crumpled into the snow. The others hesitated, momentarily stunned by the ferocity of the attack, their predatory rhythm shattered. The stallion reared, towering against the broken sky, his scream a raw declaration of dominance that reverberated through the forest. The wolves slunk back a few steps, their ears flat against their skulls. Yet their hunger kept them from retreating fully. They circled, wary now, eyes flicking between the powerful intruder and the frail Mustang still trapped against the tree. The Mustang watched, breathless, as the stallion lowered his massive body into a fighting stance. Blood dripped from a shallow gash on his shoulder where a wolf had scored a lucky strike, but he seemed unfazed, his focus absolute. This was a creature carved from the wild, built to survive, and he had chosen to stand here, against these odds, for a stranger. The wolves regrouped, their leader, a grizzled alpha with a torn ear, stepping forward with a low growl that rumbled through the still air. In an instant the wolves surged forward together, a coordinated wave of snarling fury. The stallion plunged into their midst like a thunderbolt, kicking and trampling, his teeth snapping at anything that ventured too close. The battle was savage and frenzied, a blur of fur, hooves, and blood. The Mustang, pinned by the rope, could only watch, his heart hammering painfully. Every instinct screamed for him to move, to join the fight, to live. He strained against the rope again, the fibers creaking under the strain, his neck muscles quivering with effort. Pain lanced through him, but he welcomed it. It meant he was still alive. The battle raged only a few feet away. Two wolves managed to dart past the stallion's defenses, their eyes gleaming with triumph as they closed in on the defenseless Mustang. He flailed desperately, swinging his head, trying to ward them off, but the rope robbed him of reach. One wolf lunged, its teeth snapping at his already injured leg, and the Mustang let out a shrill scream of terror and fury. From the corner of his eye, he saw the black stallion wheel around, his body a blur of motion. In two powerful strides, the stallion closed the distance and struck the attacking wolf with a savage kick that sent it sprawling, whining, into the snow. The second wolf turned to flee, tail tucked between its legs, disappearing into the mist with a low whimper. Blood stained the snow, mingling with the churned earth and scattered tufts of fur. The remaining wolves, battered and bloodied, realized the battle had turned. One by one, they slinked away into the dark, their eyes still burning with hunger but their spirits cowed. The stallion stood rigid until the last of them melted into the forest shadows, his sides heaving, steam rising from his sweat-drenched coat. Silence returned, heavy and profound. The Mustang sagged against the tree, every muscle trembling from the aftermath of terror. The black stallion turned toward him then, his breath coming in harsh gusts, blood dripping slowly from a torn ear. For a long moment, they regarded each other across the small, ruined clearing, two survivors bound by a strange, silent accord. Then, with deliberate steps, the stallion approached. The Mustang flinched, every nerve raw and screaming with the fear of yet another betrayal. But the stallion did not strike. He lowered his great head and inspected the frayed rope with intelligent eyes. With careful precision, he took the rope between his teeth and pulled. The Mustang felt a jolt as the rope tightened momentarily, then began to give way. The stallion braced himself, muscles rippling, and pulled again, harder. The bark of the tree groaned in protest. Another tug, and the rope snapped, fraying apart like old thread. The Mustang stumbled forward, suddenly free but too weak to stand properly. His legs buckled, and he collapsed onto his side, chest heaving, nostrils flaring wide. He expected the stallion to leave him then, to vanish into the night like some fleeting dream. But instead, the black figure remained, standing sentinel over him, as though guarding him against the darkness that still loomed at the edges of the forest. Through the haze of pain and exhaustion, the Mustang felt something he hadn't known in a long time: hope. The stallion nudged him gently with his muzzle, an unmistakable invitation to rise. Every fiber of the Mustang's being screamed in protest. His muscles ached, his wounds throbbed, and his body felt like it no longer belonged to him. But the stallion snorted impatiently, stamping a hoof beside him, and somehow, the Mustang found the strength to try. He staggered to his knees first, slipping twice before managing to get upright. His legs wobbled dangerously, but he locked his joints and stood, swaying. The stallion circled him once, inspecting, assessing. Then he turned and began to walk away, slow and deliberate, pausing after a few strides to look back. The message was clear. With a grunt of effort, the Mustang forced his battered body into motion. Every step was agony, every breath a battle. But he moved. He followed the stallion into the depths of the misty woods, away from the tree that had nearly been his grave, away from the scent of blood and fear. The night seemed less oppressive now, the darkness softened by the flickering presence of hope. The forest, once a gallery of lurking death, became a cathedral of survival. The Mustang's hooves, though dragging and uncertain, found purchase on the frozen ground. And each step forward was a tiny defiance against the fate he had been sentenced to. The black stallion led him through the maze of trees with a surety that seemed almost supernatural. He moved with the ease of a creature who had never been caged, who had never bowed his head to a halter or rope. His every movement spoke of ancient knowledge, of battles fought and won in the secret places of the wild. The Mustang followed blindly, his mind swimming with pain and confusion. Yet beneath it all, a fierce ember of something deeper flared to life, an instinct he had almost forgotten. Survival was not given, it was seized, fought for, earned. They traveled deeper into the wilderness, the air growing colder, the trees thicker. Shadows pressed close, but the stallion moved unafraid. Every so often he would glance back, ensuring the Mustang still followed, still fought to stay upright. When the younger horse faltered, the stallion would slow his pace, waiting patiently before continuing. Hours seemed to pass, or perhaps only minutes. Time had become a meaningless blur of pain and determination. Finally, they reached a break in the trees where the moon spilled silver light across a frozen clearing. In the center stood a rough circle of boulders, half buried by snow. It was here the stallion stopped, turning to face the Mustang fully. The younger horse staggered into the clearing, his body screaming for rest. He looked around, bewildered. Why had they come here? There was no shelter, no safety that he could see. Only rocks and snow and the bitter kiss of the wind. The stallion lowered his head, pawing at the ground with deliberate movements, clearing a patch of earth. He snorted once, sharp and commanding. The Mustang hesitated, unsure, but something deep within urged him forward. He mirrored the stallion's movements, weakly at first, then with growing strength, scraping the snow aside. Beneath the frozen crust lay a patch of hardy grass, thin but alive. The Mustang's knees nearly buckled again, not from exhaustion this time, but from the overwhelming surge of gratitude. He dropped his head and began to nibble at the grass, the sweet taste of life flooding his senses. The stallion stood nearby, watchful but calm, his dark figure a bastion against the encroaching night. The Mustang ate, slowly at first, then more greedily, his strength returning in precious increments with every mouthful. Tears he didn't know he could cry stung his eyes, blurring the world into shimmering halos. He was alive. Against all odds, he was alive. The black stallion lifted his head, ears swiveling to catch some distant sound. He stamped once, as if affirming something to himself, then turned his gaze back to the Mustang. Tomorrow would bring new trials, new battles. The forest was not tamed, nor would it show mercy. But for tonight there was food, there was safety, and there was an unlikely alliance born in blood and defiance. The Mustang lifted his head too, meeting the stallion's gaze with something new flickering in his battered heart: resolve. In the frozen silence of the wilderness, two souls stood together, no longer prey, no longer alone. Morning clawed its way into the world, pale and bitter. A thin mist curled between the trees, clinging to the ground like a reluctant ghost. The Mustang woke with a shudder, every inch of his body aching from the ordeal of the previous night. His wounds, though scabbed over, throbbed dully with each heartbeat. Yet he was alive, and the simple act of breathing felt like a rebellious victory. Nearby, the black stallion stood, a silent sentinel watching the shifting woods. His body bore the marks of the fight, ragged scratches, a gash along his flank, but he held himself with a quiet, indomitable strength that seemed to defy the very air around him. When he noticed the Mustang stirring, he approached with slow, deliberate steps. The younger horse tensed instinctively, a flicker of fear still lingering in his battered heart. But the stallion did not force closeness. He simply stood there, close enough to be felt, his presence a grounding weight in the swirling uncertainty. The Mustang lifted his head, ears flicking uncertainly. He had no herd, no human, no purpose except the raw imperative to survive. And yet, Here was this strange protector who had pulled him from death's jaws, offering nothing more than companionship and, perhaps, a chance to reclaim the wildness he had been robbed of. The stallion moved first, stepping through the clearing toward the dense wall of trees. He paused at the edge, looking back once, waiting. The invitation was clear: follow or be left to the cold mercy of the world. With trembling legs and gritted determination, the Mustang took a step forward. Then another, and another, until he fell into a slow, limping gait beside the stallion. The forest closed around them, a labyrinth of towering pines and snow-laden branches. The air was thick with the musk of damp earth and the faint metallic scent of distant water. The black stallion navigated the terrain with ease, choosing paths hidden from the biting wind, routes where the snow was less deep. He led not as a master, but as a guide, always checking that his companion could keep pace. 4 hours they traveled in silence, broken only by the crunch of hooves against snow and the occasional soft snort of breath. The Mustang, though weak, felt a stubborn spark inside him grow with each step. A part of him, long dormant, stirred, a primal memory of freedom, of racing the wind without fences or ropes. By midday, the trees thinned, and they found themselves overlooking a frozen river that wound through a shallow valley. Deer tracks crisscrossed the banks, and overhead, a hawk circled lazily. The stallion descended the slope carefully, pausing to test the frozen edges before stepping onto the ice. He crossed without incident, turning back to watch as the Mustang hesitated. The younger horse pawed at the ice nervously, ears pinned back. His experiences with water had been limited to muddy troughs and shallow pools in dusty field. The idea of stepping onto something so alien, something that looked solid but whispered danger, sent a shiver down his spine. The stallion gave a low, encouraging nicker. He didn't command. He didn't demand. He waited. Gritting his teeth against the tremor in his legs, the Mustang stepped forward. The ice groaned under his weight, but it held. Hard hammering, he moved across, each step tentative but gaining confidence. When he reached the opposite bank, the stallion gave a short nod, as if acknowledging a small, hard-won triumph. Beyond the river, the landscape changed. The trees grew gnarled and twisted, clinging to rocky outcrops and cliffs that jutted from the earth like broken teeth. The climb was brutal. Loose stones shifted under their hooves, and the wind tore at their manes with greedy fingers. Several times the Mustang slipped, and once he nearly fell, but each time he caught himself, driven by the unwavering figure of the stallion ahead. Near the summit of the ridge, they found shelter beneath an overhanging ledge. The rock provided a crude barrier against the worst of the wind, and in its shadow they rested. The Mustang collapsed into the snow, his sides heaving. The stallion remained standing, head high, eyes scanning the horizon for unseen threats. Hours passed. The sky darkened again, clouds thick with the promise of another storm. The Mustang dozed fitfully, haunted by dreams of teeth and ropes and the burning helplessness of abandonment. When he woke, the stallion was still there, unmoving, steadfast as a mountain. That night, the storm broke with a vengeance. Snow slashed sideways, carried by howling winds that screamed through the trees. The cold bit deep, merciless and sharp. Huddled together beneath the ledge, the Mustang and the stallion braced against the fury. The Mustang pressed close, seeking warmth, and the stallion allowed it without protest. In the heart of the storm, something shifted between them. A bond formed not from dominance or submission, but from survival, from trust forged in the crucible of shared hardship. The Mustang, once a broken creature resigned to death, began to believe in the possibility of something more. Morning came sluggishly, the storm spent but the world left heavy and white in its wake. Snowdrifts buried the lower trees, and the river was lost beneath a thick, treacherous crust. The stallion nudged the Mustang awake with a soft grunt. There was no time for weakness. To live meant to move. They set off again, weaving through the crippled forest, avoiding the places where the snow was too deep. The Mustang's strength returned in fits and starts. His wounds, while still raw, began to knit together beneath his growing winter coat. His steps, though still marred by a slight limp, grew more confident. Once, they came across a fallen tree laden with ice. The stallion stopped, ears pricked, and after a moment, the Mustang saw why. Beneath the tangled branches lay the frozen body of a coyote, its eyes wide and glazed. Even predators fell to the cruelty of winter. They moved on quickly. Days blended together. Hunger gnawed at their bellies, but they found enough bark, enough dry grass under the snow to survive. Thirst was slaked by icicles and melted snowbanks. Each trial they overcame was a testament to the will that refused to die. The Mustang changed in ways deeper than flesh. He no longer flinched at every sound. He no longer waited for a rope to tighten around his throat. The fear that had once ruled him shrank, replaced by a fierceness born of necessity. The black stallion taught without words, his lessons carved into the marrow of survival. He showed the Mustang how to test the ground before running, how to scent danger on the wind, how to move like a shadow when the world turned hostile. And the Mustang, in turn, learned to trust, not blindly but with eyes wide open, aware that trust was a precious thing, earned in blood and sacrifice. One evening, as the sun bled across the horizon, setting the sky ablaze with streaks of crimson and gold, they stood together on a bluff overlooking a vast, open plain. In the distance, dark shapes moved, other horses, a herd grazing in the last light of day. The Mustang's breath caught in his throat. He had almost forgotten what it was to be among his own kind, to feel the pull of a herd's heartbeat echoing in his chest. A part of him, wild and aching, yearned to run to them, to be lost in the safety of numbers. But he hesitated, glancing at the stallion beside him. The black horse stood still, his gaze fixed on the herd but making no move toward them. He belonged nowhere and everywhere, a creature. Winter deepened, wrapping the world in an endless hush. Days passed in a blur of white and shadow, each one a test of endurance. The Mustang and the stallion moved like spirits across the frozen land, bound by necessity, driven by a force neither fully understood but both respected. Every breath frosted the air between them, every shared glance spoke volumes without a sound. The Mustang's body hardened with the season. His once lean frame filled out with muscle, his coat thickened, his wounds faded to scars that bore silent testimony to his survival. But beyond the physical, something profound had shifted within him. No longer did he carry himself as a creature expecting cruelty at every turn. He walked with his head higher, his stride more assured, his spirit no longer bowed under invisible chains. One bitter afternoon, as the sky sagged with leaden clouds and the scent of snow thickened, they came upon a scene that made the Mustang freeze. A cluster of trees opened into a clearing where a figure slumped against a fallen log, half buried in snow. A man. The stallion paused, ears flicked forward, nostrils flaring to catch the scent. The Mustang's heart thudded painfully in his chest, every instinct screaming caution. Humans had been the architects of his misery, their ropes, their blows, their cold indifference. Yet something about this figure tugged at him, not fear, but recognition of something broken. The man stirred weakly, lifting his head with visible effort. His face was gaunt, hollow-eyed, framed by a tangled mess of beard and hair. His hands, raw and cracked from the cold, clutched a battered blanket around his shoulders. His lips moved soundlessly, a whisper lost to the wind. The stallion took a step back, muscles taut. He knew better than to tangle with the two-legged creatures. But the Mustang lingered, torn between instinct and something deeper, something dangerously close to compassion. The man's gaze found him, and for a fleeting second, the Mustang saw not a predator, not a captor, but a fellow survivor. A soul abandoned to the mercies of a world that too often forgot the weak. Against all sense, the Mustang stepped forward. The snow crunched under his hooves, startling the man. His sunken eyes widened in disbelief. With a trembling hand, he reached out, palm open, fingers blue with cold. No rope. No weapon. Just the raw, desperate plea of someone who had nothing left to lose. The stallion snorted in warning, but the Mustang ignored him. He approached cautiously, muscles ready to bolt at the slightest threat. Yet the man only sagged back against the log, overwhelmed by exhaustion. Close now, the Mustang could see the terrible shiver racking the man's body. He was dying, slowly, quietly, as the wilderness claimed another forgotten soul. And somehow, inexplicably, the Mustang understood. He knew what it was to be discarded, to be left for dead while the world moved on. Lowering his head, the Mustang exhaled softly, his breath warming the frozen air between them. The man smiled faintly, tears freezing against his lashes. In that moment, something unspoken passed between them, a recognition, a fragile bond formed not through domination, but shared suffering. The stallion stamped a hoof, impatient, urging movement. The storm was coming fast, and to linger meant death for all of them. The Mustang glanced between the man and his companion. Logic demanded he leave the human to his fate. Nature was cruel, indifferent. But some embers refused to die, no matter how fierce the storm. With a soft nudge, the Mustang pushed his nose against the man's chest. The man clutched at him weakly, trying to rise. Summoning a strength born from desperation, he managed to loop his arms over the Mustang's withers, clinging like a drowning man to driftwood. Step by step, the Mustang dragged him toward the shelter of the trees, where the wind was less vicious. The stallion circled anxiously but did not abandon them, his loyalty to the Mustang outweighing his mistrust of men. They found a hollow between two fallen trees, a place where the snow was shallow and the wind howled less fiercely. The Mustang lowered himself carefully, allowing the man to slump against his side, using his body heat as a shield against the cold. The stallion stood guard nearby, eyes gleaming with wary vigilance. The hours crawled by, each one a fragile thread stretched to the breaking point. The man faded in and out of consciousness, murmuring incoherent fragments of a life long past. Names, places, regrets. The Mustang did not sleep. He remained still and steadfast, even as the cold seeped into his bones, even as exhaustion gnawed at him. He owed the man nothing, yet he stayed. Dawn broke at last, grim and gray. The storm had spent its fury, leaving behind a landscape sculpted in white silence. The man stirred feebly, his body no longer trembling so violently. His eyes opened, clearer than before, and he gazed at the Mustang with something approaching awe. "Good boy," he rasped, voice broken as wind-blown leaves. "Good boy." The Mustang flicked an ear but remained otherwise motionless. Words meant little to him. Actions, loyalty, survival, these were the truths he understood. The stallion approached, snorting softly. Time was short. If the man remained here, he would die. And so would they. The man seemed to sense it too. Grunting with effort, he pushed himself to his knees. He patted the Mustang's neck weakly before dragging himself upright, swaying like a sapling in the storm. He took a few stumbling steps, then collapsed again into the snow. The Mustang nickered low, a sound of frustration and encouragement. He nosed the man gently, urging him to rise. Once, twice. On the third attempt, the man managed to find his feet. Slowly, painfully, they began moving. The stallion led, breaking trail through the deep drift. The Mustang flanked the man closely, ready to catch him if he fell. The journey was grueling. Every step sapped what little strength the man had left. But somehow, through sheer stubborn will, they pressed forward. By midday, the land dipped into a shallow valley where smoke curled lazily into the sky from a distant cabin. Civilization. Safety. The Mustang hesitated at the edge of the trees, torn once more between instinct and the strange loyalty that had taken root in his heart. The man staggered forward alone, falling to his knees before the cabin's door. A figure appeared, rushing out with a cry of alarm, gathering the man into their arms, dragging him inside. The door slammed shut against the cold. The Mustang stood in the snow, heart pounding, uncertain. Beside him, the stallion gave a soft whinny, nudging his shoulder. The message was clear. He had done enough. It was time to move on. Together they turned away, leaving the cabin and the man to their fate. As they climbed the ridge overlooking the valley, the Mustang paused, glancing back one last time. Smoke rose steadily from the chimney now, a beacon of life against the dead white landscape. He felt no regret, only a quiet, fierce pride. He was no longer the broken creature tied to a tree, waiting for death. He was no longer defined by the cruelty of men. He had found his strength, not in the absence of suffering, but because of it. The black stallion tossed his head and broke into a gallop, snow spraying in his wake. With a triumphant snort, the Mustang followed, muscles singing with the joy of movement, of freedom, of life hard-won and fiercely cherished. They raced the wind across the endless plains, two shadows,